Are you ready? Let's go!
Don't you sometimes just want to talk about everything? You know, there's days when you can just talk about anything. Need to sit back and chat about nothing at all? Nothing But Julie, coming at you with fun and creative topics and interviews.
Did you hear Julie's podcast? She's got the greatest topics.
Come join the chat about everything, anything, and nothing. So unwind and tune in to Nothing But Julie. Great topics and cool interviews with some pretty awesome people. And now, without further delay, here's Nothing But Julie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Julie Schrager, with the podcast Nothing But Julie. How was your weekend, everybody? We have finally approached Hump Day. Did you ever see the Geico commercial with the camel? Julie. Do you know what day it is? It's Hump Day. Well, that's me, Julie, on Hump Day, but I don't work for Geico, so that was not a plug either. So anyway, thanks again for joining me, and we are Wednesday, November 4th. We are in November, folks, and I have got to tell you, I live in South Florida, and finally, it's getting nice here. Yesterday, it was incredible. I think that, like the gods said, you know, they've had some really crappy weather. It's been humid. It's been hot. It's literally been unbreathable weather. So they all decided, let's make the very first day, it's going to be cool, a beautiful one. It was gorgeous. I think it must have been in the 70s, and it was breezy. You know, it was election day, and my polling area is in my neighborhood at my clubhouse. So I was fortunate enough to be able to walk outside to the polling area in the most beautiful weather. And I will tell you something. I was out almost all day, even if there was not much to do, but I was pretty busy. But I was able to do a lot of my work from my laptop on my computer outside. And I enjoyed every minute of it. And I'm kind of upset that I threw away my fire pit outside, because it would really be great fire pit weather, and I love doing s'mores this time of year. It's just so much fun. But anyway, I wanted to talk about something today that I think is pretty cool, and I'm just going to kind of wing it, but it's about life now versus then. Marriages, the role between husband and wife, how gender roles have changed, and how the role of a mother and a father has changed. And, you know, it's kind of cool when you, decide to do some research. And because sometimes when you decide, I'd really love to touch on this topic, I'd really love to talk about this, it is sometimes really hard to think back. And when you do research, and you're like, oh my God, that's right. I can't believe how much has changed since then and now. All of a sudden, it's like this light bulb goes off, and it helps you to really see just how much has changed. And I have got to tell you, I know that there's been a lot of change. I think about what it was like when I was a kid living at home. And then I think about what it must have been like for my parents as children growing up, and how every generation grows up different than the next. And I remember, you know, then versus now. Then being a kid in the 80s, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, versus my son growing up in, the late 90s to now. And I just think that so much has changed. When I was a kid, and I've spoken about this before on my podcast, the music was amazing. There wasn't as much fear, I think, associated with as many things as there is now. I think that we lived a more kind of free-willed life. And of course, there was stuff that was going on in politics. But, when you're a kid, you just don't, really access that or care about it. It's not until you get older that you get into politics. I think that there might be some children that are into it at a young age. I certainly wasn't, but and I just remember not really having a whole lot of fears in life, as do many kids today with what's going on in this shitty, shitty world. And it makes me really sad because, I thought that when I was in my 50s that I would really be enjoying my life and, start traveling, meeting new people, seeing different things. My husband and I have worked for a long time. My husband is, inching closer and closer to retirement. I thought that by now we would start enjoying some of the fruits of our labor. The last thing I thought about, and many of you hadn't thought about, was having to live through a pandemic. Who would have thought that we'd be living through a pandemic in 2020 and that it wouldn't have a handle? We would not have a handle on it, as we do not right now. And who would have thought at this stage of your life, or my stage of my life, that there would be restrictions on flying, and even if those restrictions are not as tight as they were before, why in the world would I get on a plane right now? And why in the world would I think of traveling to a different country when there's a new wave of COVID? And to be honest with you, I don't even agree with this second or third wave. It's never gone away. Okay, so let's just call it the spike. All right, there's just another spike. Germany's shutting down, Italy's shutting down again, and the number one country in the world that has zero coronavirus, Australia. Australia is bad ass. That government, they don't care about what you think, what you say. They make the decisions, they put their foot down, and there is no straying from that. You try and come into their country, lots of luck. They will not let you in. They were on lockdown for a very long time, mandatory mask wearing, and a few other things I can't remember. And because of the control they had and because of what they did, they are now at zero COVID cases. I mean, and here we are in America having this laissez-faire attitude. And the thing of it is I know everybody wants to point to Trump, and I'm not going to go over, who my political party is, but there are so many people that want to point to Trump. Trump. But here's the thing. How many people really were doing what they were supposed to do, even when they were supposed to be wearing masks? All the fakakta people coming into the supermarkets and wherever saying, I have asthma and I can't wear it because of this. I mean, the stupidity. Australia was fining people $500 on the spot or you would be arrested, and they gave you no choice. And that's why they're doing so well. So I just think that there are so many people that just don't give a shit anymore. The poor Americans, they don't care anymore about wearing masks. And I swear if I hear one more person say, I can't wear a mask because I have asthma or I have this or I have that, well, life would really suck for you if you don't wear a mask and you get COVID when you have asthma. So maybe you should think about that. Instead of however short period of time you are going to actually be in the same store I'm in. I was in a Whole Foods last week, and no joke, every single person except one was wearing a mask. And every time I would weave in and out of an aisle, this woman who was not wearing a mask was right there behind me. And I felt like I was in that spot where, you see on like TikToks, if you watch it, or any viral video, where am I supposed to say something to her? Am I supposed to give her a dirty look? Am I supposed to just keep walking? What do I do? Well, I mean, of course I'm not going to say anything to her. She's an idiot. I'm protected. I'm wearing a mask, but she's an idiot. And I can't tell you how many people would look at her or look back at her just to see if maybe she was putting the mask on. It's people like that I feel are not only like in desperate need of attention, but are just stupid. And it's the stupid people like that that are putting others in harm's way. And they are the reason why we still have this. The amount of lives that would be saved and the amount of people who would not get COVID would be massive if people just shut up and put on a mask. But it is what it is right now. You have to do the right thing, and hopefully we'll all get through this at some point. But moving on, let's talk about how the American family has changed, at least in like the past, I would say 50 years. I mean, I think that in the 60s, oh my God, the Leave It to Beaver years was so different. I think that back then, there were very limited forms of families. Whereas today, we have so many forms of, we have so many forms of families, whether you have children that are living with mother and father, mother and stepfather, stepmother and father, cousins, grandparents, aunts, uncles, mixed race. I mean, there are so many different genres and forms of families that have been going on, over, I would say, the past 30 to maybe 40 years. And it was a slow progression. You also have single parent households. There could be those that maybe are separated and not divorced. So there's so many different forms now than ever before. And for one thing that I have noticed over at least the last, I would say with the current generation, the millennials, that many are, men and women, either are not getting married, or if they do, they're getting married at an older age. Now, I got married when I was 24. And I didn't do it because it was the thing to do. I mean, I fell in love, I got married. But when I look back, like in retrospect, and think about all the things that I could have done that I didn't do, well, certainly I realized that, if I had a chance to do it again, that I would probably want to wait. But, I mean, it's not like I had a ton of money to go travel the world. It was hard enough to find people to go out with, like, on a Saturday night, because you might have one friend that has a boyfriend. You might have one that has a fiance. I mean, as you get older, this is what happens. So, I mean, it was not easy to, always find people to go out with, let alone find someone that's going to, go with you to a different country. But I know that there's a lot more people that are waiting to get married. I mean, women aren't getting married until their 30s or even 40s. They're not having children until later. Many of them don't want to have children or want to adopt, which I think is wonderful. And let me also say, with that comes adult children staying with mommy and daddy longer. I have a 24-year-old. I don't consider that to be old, but I have no problem with him staying with me and, being able to save his money so when he's ready, he can get a house. He has that luxury. It does not mean that he's not responsible and that he doesn't have a job and that he doesn't do things around the house and that he doesn't pay his own way. He does. However, if I can give him a roof over his house and I have one child, I will do it. So there. But these young adults are staying with mom and dad, even longer. And some of them, I think, I have an acquaintance friend whose son still lives with her, and he's 34 years old. I don't know how I feel about that exactly, but I don't pass judgment on anyone. The question really is would I want that? And it's really hard for me to say because I'm not there yet. It's kind of like, when my son was in middle school and he was friends with a high schooler and he would get together, hang out, and the high schooler would use certain words that my middle schoolers just should not be using. And I realized it's going to probably happen. This is kind of like the same thing. I can't really judge anyone who has a 34-year-old kid living with them when that might happen to me. It's not my right to do that. But the question is, would I want that? Well, I would hope that by the time my son is 34, he would want to be living on his own and he would have the means to do so. But as we can see with what's happening in this world, there's lots of things that are just coming up that we probably never would have expected. And I'll just leave that there. Another thing that I've seen a big change in is that there's less people living with their spouses. I've noticed that not only are a lot of women getting pregnant with their boyfriends, but there's no commitment. And some of them might be committed with maybe, let's say, getting a house together, but there's no marriage commitment. Or maybe they don't want to live with each other, but they want to have a baby because maybe they're getting older. There's just so many ways to look at that. I mean, I know that there's a lot of different arrangements with adults nowadays versus, let's say, like the 1960s. In the 1960s, it was marriage, kids, the woman stays at home, the whole Leave It to Beaver, kind of household. No. Things have definitely changed. I mean, the Stepford wives and Stepford husbands, I mean, some of them still exist, but that's how it was in the 60s. And many of them are just not getting married. And there are some people that are like, they're not married, but that's the older generation. The newer generation or the newer generations are more just like, yeah, so, it's much more acceptable. It's funny, than with the older generation. And like I had mentioned before, a lot of women are delaying parenthood. Many of them want to travel, except for now. Many of them want to work until, they can make a certain amount of money, or they're just looking to have independence and freedom before they are, for lack of better words, tied down with a child. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know there were a lot more women that were having, children at younger ages. And some of them might regret having them so young and then wish that they went on to other things. There's women who have children that are getting their bachelor's and their master's and their doctorates now online, because they plan on working when the children maybe get a little bit older, which I think is wonderful. But many of them are not waiting for marriage. I mean, there's a lot of women I notice that might never want to get married. Same with a lot of men. I mean, look at George Clooney. He finally got married and had children, but there's still a lot of people out there that don't believe in the institution of marriage, or maybe it's just never happened for them yet. Or maybe they just don't want it to happen. There's nothing wrong with that. There's so many stigmas that come with living and life on this earth. And one of them is the whole gasp of, oh my God, you're 30 years old, you're not married, no children. I mean, it's a little silly, but I also notice that between now and the 60s, the living arrangements of children is definitely more varied, aside from living by themselves. Living with their parents. There really are quite a few that are living on their own or living now with roommates because they want that big house, but they can't afford it. So they get a few roommates, and it's like a bachelor pad of a home. That's happening a lot here in Florida. I've noticed where when kids graduate high school, a few of their friends rent a nice-sized house so they don't have to live with their parents, and they can still be independent, but, need roommates to help pay the rent and the other bills. So there's nothing wrong with that. So it's not only that families come like in different forms, but they're also like more fluid, I guess is a good way to put it. Where children are experiencing different kinds of households, where many years ago, if a couple were to get divorced, oh my God, what happens with the children? And the children are going to be so upset. And I am very certain that still happens today. but it's much more common today. And I think that children might be a little more accepting of it. They can stay at the dad's house this weekend, the mom's house this weekend. Maybe some of the children look forward to having alone time with just one parent. I don't know. I've never been in that situation. But the living arrangements of children might be with just the mother, might be with just the father. Like I said earlier, might be with the grandparents. I do know from like some kind of census that I had read that families are getting smaller too. I have one child. But I know in the 1960s you couldn't have any less than two children. And today things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that census I was talking about was households by size on PennLive.com. And it says that, let's see, it shows in 2012 that there was maybe one person living alone in 2012. I'm sorry, let me restate that. 5 people or more were living together in 1970, whereas now it's less. I think that more people are becoming more independent. Those that go away to college become more independent. I don't know many children that still want to stay with their parents at a certain age. Maybe they have to just because of money, especially with how the economy has been. But there's also a lot of people who like to live alone if they can afford it. I know someone whose child, recently moved out of state, and she has her own apartment and a dog. And she has someone come by once a day to walk the dog. She's got a very well paying job, and she's very happy living on her own without any other roommates and just having her dog. Another thing that has changed within households, and this has been going on for a while now, but where moms have moved into the workforce, and aside from moms having to work, because many households have become two-income households because it's just how the world has become, but unlike before, there were not a lot of women like in the 60s or 70s that were working. I think it was like 18% of mothers with infants might have been in the workforce. And today I think it's like 70% or something like that. There were not as many women in the workforce because their job was, like I said, the leave it to beaver, stay at home mom. And you're home and you're taking care of the home and you're doing all the food shopping. Not like that anymore. As a matter of fact, there are many women who are the main breadwinners in the household versus men. It's got nothing to do with anything. The world has changed. There's so much more diversity, also with the households, like black women and white men, black men, white women living together. Interracial relationships is at an astounding rate now. Whereas back in the 60s, it was like almost unheard of. And if you were walking down the street with someone that was a different race than you, it was like, what? There's so many different genres of relationships, whether you are LGBTQ, okay, like I said, interracial relationships, Asian relationships. I have actually a friend who's Asian and who is married to someone who is not Asian. And it's so much more widespread now than back in the 1960s. So a lot has changed. There's a lot more openness, a lot more acceptance, and then there isn't. There's like multiracial couples that it's more apparent now today than ever before. Excuse me. The stigma that it used to be like, I'm going to be honest with you. When I was a kid growing up in the 80s and I saw an interracial couple, I was like, oh my God, look, it was such a, it was a shock. And now it's like, oh, whatever. It doesn't even faze me. But as a kid, because it was not as apparent as it is now. But it kind of leads me into, talking about, gender roles throughout history and men and women and the difference between now and, I don't know, back in the 60s. I mean, what do you think is one of the biggest things that's changed in the last 50 to 100 years? I mean, look, I can't think back to 100 years, but I mean, going back to the Great Depression, to when divorce was like a big no-no, and men would get fired from their job or not be given a promotion if the company found out that he got divorced. That was like, no divorce. And even if a man wasn't married, it was all about men back then. If a man wasn't married, that stigma was attached to him. He's not married. What are you talking about? Things were really bad in the Great Depression, obviously. Things are not too good here, but it's not as bad as it was in the Great Depression. But, we're talking about things like equality and how the roles of women have changed even more. I mean, I remember, I think I might have been in high school or maybe the latter part of middle school, and reading about how women back in like the early 1900s were all dressed up, laced up, covered up, buttoned down. And when you think about women today, a modern woman that we see today in the 2000s, I mean, the evolution of the woman and how they dress has changed so much. And to see how women are dressed now, they don't have to cover up as much. They don't need to be wearing a specific style. Whatever you want to wear, well, within a certain means. But you know what I mean? Things have changed so much. Women were so repressed back then and dominated by a male-oriented, culture, that you almost felt like back then that a woman was a second-class citizen. It's really, really sad. But the amazing thing is to think about how less than 100 years ago, women generally didn't work outside their home. And now many women are the main breadwinners in the family. Some men are stay-at-home dads. Some men are not making as much as the other woman. And there's nothing wrong with that. Where was it ever written that a man has to be the breadwinner? No. But I think that, when women kind of got, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe after or during World War II, women were, I believe, beginning to get very much employed in filling like the traditional man's role, because many of the men were in the war. And so many of these women had to take over a lot of the men's roles. And I think that women got this newfound freedom. They got a taste of it. It was like more of a step forward towards equality. And that carried through to today. And I think that the more traditional gender roles that are out there for women, they have embraced it. There are women that are doing things that no one would ever think a woman would do, like being a pilot. I mean, a woman can be a pilot of any airline, but it's still a bit shocking if you find out that there's a woman pilot or a woman piloting the plane. There are so many women that are in, and I'm using this loosely, men's roles now that more than ever before. I think it's wonderful. And even in relationships, I think that like women were always walking a tightrope. Where they had to be like, in the Leave It to Beaver type of household and the Stepford wife, and they had to be kind of, subservient, to men, like the food always had to be on the table at a certain time. The kids had to be bed at a certain time. House always had to be clean. And that was acceptable back then. Maybe not to many women, but I also know that today that the household has been divided. Men are more apt now to being the stay-at-home dad, taking care of the kids, cleaning the house, having food ready for the wife. And they are helping even more now when they get home from work than they ever have before with, parenting. My husband's always been great. I hate to say that, but he's always been great with that and always been a helpful hand for me. It's nice when you meet somebody that does not have a specific type of role laid out for you. And not a lot of people are like that, right now. There's a big balance of like emotional equity between a man and a woman. And there's still a lot of men that, have certain stigmas because of how they were brought up. But things are getting looser rather than, tighter. And the male role nowadays, it's almost become very acceptable in our culture. I think more than ever before. And men, more than ever before, are so much more involved with their children. It's not just about the woman taking care of the child, which is wonderful. And I know I always love saying, back in my day, I sound like, like my grandfather, well, back in my day. But, if you explore, like, well, I remember reading about, and this was from mom.com, and it says that the decade beginning in 2010 was an explosion of changes for parents. And it became the start of a decade represented in a major shift on how we parent, from the challenges that millennial parents face to how we're all still trying to figure it out. That's a quote from mom.com. And, I'll tell you something. Men, I see more than ever before in the supermarket doing shopping. And my husband does that too. It's hard to believe. I mean, I don't think my father ever stepped inside a supermarket when we were kids. It was always my mom that, was doing it. And I think that, in the last at least 10 years, a lot of that has changed. Now that we have Amazon Prime, things are a little bit different. And with COVID, a lot of people are still getting deliveries and not going into the supermarket. But I will tell you something that really bothers me. It really, really bothers me. Public breastfeeding and the people who are not accepting of it. I did nurse my son, and I was very concerned about what people would think. I never ripped out my boob in public, and I never sat in a public place, even with something over my son's face or my breast when I was feeding. I was actually uncomfortable, and that was okay. If I ever was somewhere with my son, I would go somewhere and I would, take care of it in private. However, the women who decide to nurse their children, their babies, in a public place, screw all of you and how you feel. Forget that it's a breast for a minute and think about the fact that it is keeping a baby alive. That is food. And whether you like it or not, shut up. Don't say anything. Don't think that just because we live in the United States and have freedom of speech, that allows you to utilize that speech wherever and whenever you want. I know that public breastfeeding was not always legal, and there was that, but it is now, so shut up. I think that there are a lot more things that are accepting, I would say more now than ever before, and how parenting styles have even changed since, let's say, the 50s. I think that, well, first of all, I mean, the clothes in the 70s. I remember wearing my mom dressed my sister and me in like bell-bottom flowers pants with like a plaid shirt. It was horrendous. It's embarrassing to even look back at these pictures. But what I will say is I know that back in the 50s, kids were able to walk to a school, their school bus alone instead of with their parents. Not that I'm taking away from parents who want to walk their children to the bus. I'm just talking about safety. But things are just not like that now. It's a very scary world that we're living in. And you know what? It's funny because you would think things have gotten better, but it doesn't. I know that back in the 50s and the 60s, when people would end their marriages, it was a huge stigma, like I said, with divorce. And today, not only is divorce not a stigma, but many people are not even getting married, like I said earlier, and having kids later on in life, if they have kids. I mean, I think it was the first half of the 20th century, it was all about having a happy home life and the husband coming home still with his tie and his shoes on and the mother, having the table set with the two children dressed perfectly and bringing over a big chicken with rolls and mashed potatoes and now it's just completely different. Everybody's more casual. I certainly do hope that everybody tries to make time to have a family dinner. It's not easy. But if you can, it definitely helps bring people together. But it's just not how it used to be. I think that, like back in, let's say, the 60s, fathers spent very little time with their children, and they were kind of known as the disciplinarian, which I think is funny when they really had nothing to do with their kids. But now the fathers have so much quality time with their kids, no matter how tired they are. It's a totally different, perspective on, the relationship, especially when you have a parent to look back on where you might not have had a great relationship with, and then you want to sustain a great relationship with your child. So that's why things change a lot. And the greatest thing of all now in the 21st century is that we women and moms are able to just do it all. Not only can I or we spend a lot of time with our children, but we can also do that simultaneously with working, whether it's in home or out of home, and being able to juggle all of our responsibilities. And not every mom works. And there's nothing absolutely wrong with that. But like 50 years ago, come on. There were so many women that were just a stay-at-home mom taking care of the kids. And now we juggle so many things. And if you think about, in the 50s or 60s, dads hardly helped clean the house. I mean, I remember seeing like the Leave It to Beaver stuff where, the woman she gets up in the morning and she makes sure she has her makeup on and her hair done, and she's wearing a dress, and they have like a commercial with her holding like a Hoover vacuum because, she needs to make sure that she has the straight lines in her carpeting to look like, her house is clean, and Tupperware parties and all that. But I also know that in the 70s that moms were younger than they are now. A lot of women are waiting later on in life to have children. And which I think is wonderful as well. And I'll tell you something that I read that really was just wow, even though I think I kind of knew about it. But back then, mental issues with children were taken much less seriously than they are now. I think that we have really had a breakthrough and come a really, really long way since the 20th century, like anxiety or the depression, where most of the time it was swept under the rug. And not only that, but what were you supposed to do? Lock up your child in a mental facility? That was all that was there. There weren't medical advances like there is now. There was such a stigma then and now. However, it's more spoken about and more out there now than ever before. And I hope it keeps going down this path because it just makes things so much more available for people that are dealing with mental illness. I think that if you have someone that you can speak with, then that's great. If you don't, there are 800 numbers where you can call. You can always do that. There are ways of doing it, and I'm hoping that the less stigma there is out there makes it a lot easier for those who are suffering from it. But I think that the fact that so much has changed over the last, I'm going to say 70 years, from the 50s to now. I think that because so much has changed, it's made it so much better. And then I think of the world that we're in now, and I think of how we have no cure for COVID, and I think about how it was handled and how other countries handled it. It's scary to me to think that we are in 2020 and we're going through a pandemic. I never, in my heart of hearts, would have thought that we would be here, but we are, and we're all in it together. And we're dealing with all the other bullshit that I'm not going to mention. And, at some point, things can only get better as they do in this world. And I'm hopeful. And I think we all need to be hopeful. And I hope that things just continue to get better with men's roles, with women's roles, as it has, I don't think anything or pertain to society. It's just how things are going and how things work out and how we progress. And progression is great. So there's my podcast, guys. I hope you liked it. Sometimes I really like to just talk and talk and talk about something that, like, I think would really maybe help other people. This wasn't one of them, but this was just more about just how many things have changed that, we might not think about, and how lucky we are to kind of be where we are today with so much that's changed. And I just pray that things don't go backwards and they just keep moving forward. So with that, I hope that you have a great rest of your week and you enjoy your weekend. Much love. And feel free to check me out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the name Nothing But Julie. And feel free also to subscribe to my podcast and leave me a review. That would be great. Until next Wednesday, take care.